Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today we're checking out our first custom RX 6800 XT graphics card with a look at the PowerColor Red Devil. The Red Devil was definitely one of the best 5700 XT models that we reviewed, so it'll be really interesting to see how it compares with the 6800 XT, as obviously this is a higher end GPU. Speaking generally, the 6800 XT Red Devil is a triple slot, triple fan cooler with plenty of RGB lighting and a beefed up PCB. There's also onboard dual BIOS functionality with the OC BIOS rated for 2340 MHz boost clock, which is a factory overclock of 90 MHz compared to the reference spec. Before we get into all the nitty gritty though guys, just want to say please do subscribe if you haven't already, and ding that notification bell so you can stay up to date with all of our content, including a review of the Sapphire Nitro coming very soon. Okay, so kicking off with a look at the card itself, I would say generally it is pretty similar to the previous generation Red Devil, though there are a few differences. What we have is a black plastic shroud, though it does have a few brushed metal plates which have been screwed onto the plastic. In terms of the overall look though, it definitely feels a little bit less aggressive to me compared to the 5700 XT Red Devil, which was definitely a bit more angular, whereas this is a flatter design. PowerColor has still kept things very colour neutral though, even though it is still the Red Devil. The only bits of red are actually the little stickers on the two outer fans. Speaking of the fans, here we do see one key change compared to the previous generation design. And that is the fact that we now have two 100mm fans, those two on the outer edge, while the central fan measures 90mm. The 5700 XT Red Devil, for instance, had three 90mm fans, so two of them are now slightly larger. I also like to see that PowerColor has gone for matte plastic for these fan blades, whereas the previous design had glossy fan blades, which I think just cheapened the overall look slightly. As for the overall size, it is definitely a big graphics card. It measures in at 320 by 135 by 62mm, so it's a proper triple slot card and it measures well over 30 centimeters long. As always, definitely check that this is going to fit inside your case. Flipping the card over now, we can see a full-length metal backplate, though there are plenty of cutouts and ventilation holes for the back of the PCB. The Red Devil logo is also cut out into the metal and illuminated by RGB LEDs, but more on that in just a moment. We can also see a small little note saying we have a limited edition number 5 of 1000, which is quite cool. But the key thing to know here really is that the overall card and the cooler itself is identical to the regular edition. The only difference is a few extras in the box, as well as one small tweak to the display outputs, which we'll get to in a minute. Over at the front edge of the card, we can also see a dual BIOS switch. Here you can choose between the OC BIOS, which is the default option, and then the silent BIOS, which reduces power, clocks, and fan speed. And of course, we will test both of these later in the review. In terms of the RGB now, we already mentioned that Red Devil logo on the back of the card, but there's also 6 LED strips at the end of the card, which to me look a little bit like fish gills, but I don't know, it looks pretty cool once lighted up. There is even an ARGB header, and I did try connecting this to my motherboard to get the GPU controlled by ASUS Aura Sync, but unfortunately in the time I had with it I couldn't get it to work, so your mileage may vary. There is always a bit of, RGB shenanigans which can take a little bit of time to resolve. Anyway, moving on, we can also see two 8-pin power connectors, of course, same as reference. And then for display outputs, we have one HDMI, two DisplayPort 1.4, and then one USB-C. That USB-C is the only other difference, as far as I know, between the limited edition and the regular edition, as on the regular edition there's no USB-C and instead you get an extra DisplayPort. Next up, we will talk PCB, and here PowerColor has beefed up the design. There is a total 16-phase VRM for the GPU, using International Rectifier's TDA21472 MOSFETs, rated at 70 amps. The VRM controller is a 16-phase Infineon XDPE132G5D. For the memory, PowerColor is using a 3-phase solution using the International Rectifier IR35217 controller. The memory modules themselves are supplied by Samsung, and each is specified to run at 16 gigabits per second. In terms of the heatsink as well, it is a very hefty unit comprised of 2 separate fin stacks. There's a total of 7 heat pipes, 3 of which measure 8mm in diameter while the rest are 6mm, and we can see that both the GPU die and the memory contacts with a copper base plate. There's also a separate plate that contacts with the VRM. So that is it for our look at the card and the PCB then. Now we're going to move on to talk about performance. To do this, all of our testing was done with our regular test system provided by PC Specialist, and that uses an Intel i9-10900K overclocked to 5.1 GHz on all cores. That is paired with the ASUS ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard and 32 GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory clocked at 3600 MHz. As always, if you want to see all of our benchmarks and charts, do check out the written review over on kitguru.net. Kicking off our testing with out-of-the-box thermal performance then. Here we are testing both the OC and the silent BIOS. Both provide reductions in edge temperature compared to the reference design, with the silent BIOS peaking at 77 degrees compared to 73 degrees for the OC BIOS as a result of its more aggressive fan curve. Compared to the reference design then, these are reductions of 4 degrees for the silent BIOS and 8 degrees for the OC BIOS. Next up we have noise levels, and we'll start with the OC BIOS. This option sees the fans run at 45% or about 1350 RPM, producing 38 dBA on our noise meter, so it is still very easy on the ears. It is slightly louder than the reference card in this mode, but it is also running faster with a higher power target. As for the silent BIOS, this drops fan speeds down to 35% or just 1060 RPM. At this speed, the fans are effectively inaudible, and I'm sure we would have actually seen a lower noise reading than 35 dBA were it not for a small amount of coil whine, which was actually louder than the fan noise in silent mode. In normal operation though, this coil whine wasn't noticeable over our system fans, as obviously we do turn these off for the noise test, so in my opinion, it's not something to worry about, but it is worth noting. With those tests out of the way, we can see out-of-the-box performance is certainly impressive, and that continues when looking at 40 dBA noise-normalised temperatures. Here, both the OC and silent BIOS deliver better thermal performance than the reference card, with the best result coming from the silent BIOS hitting 65°C on the edge temperature, while the OC BIOS was 3 degrees hotter. The reason for this difference between the two BIOS modes is that the power limit is different between the two, so definitely worth bearing in mind. The silent BIOS appears to be targeting the 300 watt mark, coming in just shy of that in our GPU only power testing. The OC BIOS meanwhile draws about 30 watts more, which does explain the high temperatures when noise normalized at 40 dBA. As you would expect due to its increased power, the OC BIOS does run faster than the silent BIOS. Its behaviour does bounce around a little bit, but it hovers around the 2300 MHz mark. Incidentally, we can see both modes do exhibit momentary frequency drops, though these occur for just a fraction of a second. We also saw this behaviour from our reference card as well, so it's possibly something that can just be ironed out with a driver update. Either way, averaged across our entire 30-minute stress test, the OC BIOS recorded a frequency of 2300 MHz, while the silent BIOS hit 2218 MHz, which is still faster than the reference card. Next up then is our game testing. Here we don't go into as many games as our launch 6800 XT review, and that's purely because we already know how fast the 6800 XT GPU is, and all we're really trying to establish is how much a difference the factory overclock for the Red Devil makes compared to the reference design. Kicking off with control then, here the Red Devil delivers 45 FPS on average, which is just 2 frames more than the reference design, although that actually works out as a 5% improvement. It's not enough to catch up to the RTX 3080 though, coming in 13% slower in this title. Next up we have F1 2020, where the Red Devil hits 125 FPS, which is an increase of 5 FPS compared to the reference card. This works out as a margin of 4%, putting the PowerColor GPU within touching distance of the RTX 3080. Then in Gears 5, the factory overclock is enough to take the Red Devil 4% ahead of the reference 6800 XT and also 4% ahead of the RTX 3080 Founders Edition, as it delivers an extra 3 FPS. Moving on, it is more of the same in Red Dead Redemption 2. Here we can see the Red Devil comes in 4% faster than the reference 6800 XT, which closes the gap on the RTX 3080 to just 3%. And finally, for our last game, we look at Watch Dogs Legion, and this shows another 4% gain for the Red Devil over the reference 6800 XT, with the PowerColor GPU delivering an extra 2 FPS on average. All told then, an extra 4 to 5% in the games we tested at 4K compared to the reference design definitely isn't a bad result for the Red Devil. Obviously we've not tested any other cards yet, so it'll be interesting to see if they can push things even further, but overall I would say this is a pretty decent factory overclock. Of course, we did also try manual overclocking to see how much further we could push this card, and I'm pleased to say we definitely had more success than our reference 6800 XT. For our overclock, we maximised the power limit slider and the memory frequency slider, while we set our GPU frequency with a minimum at 2450 MHz and the maximum at 2600 MHz. In practice, this resulted in the frequency bouncing between 2450 and 2550 MHz. This overclock netted an extra 7% performance in F1 2020, while we saw FPS increase by 6% in Gears 5 and by just 4% in Watch Dogs Legion. We do have to bear in mind though that the Red Devil is factory overclocked anyway, so comparing to a stock reference 6800 XT, the gains are between 9 to 11%, which isn't bad at all. We can also see that power draw rose by 15% as a result of this overclock, up to an average of 375 watts. All in all then, the 6800 XT Red Devil is a very solid custom card from PowerColor. It improves on the reference design in pretty much all the key areas, it's about 4% faster, it runs cooler, and the silent BIOS is quieter too. One thing that I do think is worth noting though is that this generation is going to be a lot harder for AMD's partners to look as good as they used to compared to the reference design. For the 5700 XT for instance, it was really easy for AMD's partner cards to look good in comparison, as the blower style cooler was very hot and very loud. Now that AMD has really upped its game with the reference 6800 XT, I think the differences between a quality custom card and the reference design are going to be a lot smaller than we are used to, and I think that is the case here with the Red Devil. Still, I do think this PowerColor card does do a better job overall, while it also has that dual BIOS functionality, which is something I really like to see. The main problem at the moment is definitely just going to be availability, and at the time of filming I couldn't even get a confirmed price for the UK market. We do also have other custom cards to look at, such as the Sapphire Nitro, which will give us a better picture of how the Red Devil compares to other cards on the market. Still, that is going to do it for this one though guys, so if you liked it you can toss me a thumbs up and leave me your thoughts down below. Are you in the market for a 6800 XT, and would you consider the Red Devil? Let me know your thoughts. While you're there, please do ding that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. You can also find a link to our Discord server in the description, and why not consider backing us on Patreon, where you can see some of our content early and get access to exclusive giveaways. That is it for this one though guys. I'm Dominic for Kit Guru, and I will see you in the next video.